Most of us think that when a country's currency is weak, its economy must be failing. Strong countries have strong money. Weak countries make do with scraps of paper. That has been the Western belief for centuries. A strong currency is seen as a sign of power, stability, and prestige. A weak currency as a symbol of failure. But what if that idea was wrong? What if a weak currency could actually be a powerful tool, not a symptom of weakness, but a weapon of growth? In the late 1970s, China was a country trying to stand up from its knees. The decade-long Cultural Revolution had left it shattered. Universities were closed, factories were outdated, cities were gray and quiet, their machines rusting in silence. Millions of people had returned to the countryside. Poverty was not a social issue. It was a way of life. The outside world saw China as a sleeping giant that might never wake. Then came a man who refused to let the country sleep any longer, Deng Xiaoping. He was small in stature, but enormous in vision. While others spoke of ideology, Deng spoke of reality. His most famous line summed up his thinking perfectly. "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." China didn't need purity of ideology, it needed results. Deng's bold idea was simple. Open China to the world. Allow foreign investment, encourage exports, and use global demand to rebuild the nation. It was a radical shift from the closed, planned economy of the Mao era. In 1978, the first wave of reforms began. Small farmers were allowed to sell their crops in markets. Private workshops reopened. And on the southeastern coast, new cities were chosen for an experiment that would change history: the special economic zones. Places like Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Xiamen became laboratories of capitalism inside a socialist country. At the time, Shenzhen was a fishing village of barely 30,000 people. Within 20 years, it would become a metropolis of over 10 million. Foreign factories arrived, lured by cheap labor, tax breaks, and almost no restrictions. Ships loaded with electronics, textiles, and toys began leaving Chinese ports by the thousands. But there was a problem. To keep these goods competitive abroad, China had to make sure they stayed cheap. A freely floating yuan would rise in value as more foreign money poured in. That would make exports more expensive. So Beijing made a calculated decision: to keep its currency undervalued. The People's Bank of China acted like a hidden puppeteer, controlling every movement of the yuan. Whenever dollars came into the country from exports, the central bank bought them, flooding the domestic market with yuan and keeping the exchange rate low. On paper, $1 was worth around 8 yen. In reality, that meant every factory in China was receiving an invisible subsidy. Their products were always on sale in the world market. Imagine this. A pair of sneakers that cost $50 to make in America could be made for $5 in China. A television that sold for $1,000 in New York could be produced for $100 in Guangdong. The numbers didn't just add up. They multiplied China's advantage. By the early 2000s, the results were everywhere. The words "Made in China" were printed on almost every product in Western homes. From toys and tools to laptops and light bulbs, China had quietly become the factory of the world. In 2014, China's foreign exchange reserves reached nearly $4 trillion, the largest in human history. It was proof that the strategy had worked. The weak yuan had become the engine of an economic miracle. Western politicians looked on with confusion and frustration. To them, China was cheating, manipulating its currency to gain an unfair advantage. But inside Beijing, the logic was clear. The goal wasn't to win the next quarter, it was to win the next century. The effects in the West were dramatic. As Chinese goods became cheaper, Western factories closed. Industrial towns in America's Midwest, once full of pride and noise, grew silent. Jobs disappeared. Families moved away. The lights stayed on, but the machines stopped humming. Politicians promised retraining and innovation, but few could reverse the tide. The irony was painful. A strong dollar, once seen as a badge of honor, now meant imported goods were cheaper. But domestic production was dying. Meanwhile, every dollar America spent on Chinese goods eventually made its way back to China's central bank. Those dollars were then used to buy U.S. government bonds, financing America's own debt. The cycle was elegant, almost poetic. America consumed, China produced, and both pretended it was balance. By the early 21st century, the scale of transformation was staggering. China had lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty. Highways, airports, and skyscrapers spread across the landscape. Ports like Shanghai and Ningbo became the busiest in the world. Entire regions that were once farmland turned into industrial powerhouses. Western economists called it the miracle of globalization. But inside China, they had a simpler term: strategy. A weak currency was not a sign of failure. It was the key that unlocked the gates of global trade. Of course, every strategy comes with its critics. Washington accused Beijing of being a currency manipulator. Newspapers warned of an unfair playing field. But China did not react with outrage. It simply kept building. While debates raged in parliaments and TV studios, China was pouring concrete and laying steel. Bridges, ports, power plants, the physical backbone of a new empire. It was a patient game. Others sought prestige. China sought capacity. And capacity, once built, doesn't vanish. Even as wages in China rose and the yuan slowly appreciated after 2005, the foundation was already unshakable. The factories, the skills, the infrastructure, they couldn't be replicated overnight. Every smartphone assembled, every solar panel produced, carried a piece of China's network. Dependency replaced dominance. By the time the world noticed, it was too late. The 20th century had belonged to the dollar. The 21st began to whisper another story, one of yuan, steel, and silent patience. Today, the echoes of that decision still shape global economics. Countries talk of decoupling from China, but their supply chains remain deeply intertwined. Even Western defense systems rely on Chinese-made components. The same strategy of controlled weakness continues, though the form has evolved. China's Belt and Road Initiative, for example, extends its economic reach through infrastructure and loans rather than cheap exports. But the philosophy is unchanged: trade dependency for influence. So when people say a strong currency means strength, history reminds us to look deeper. For China, weakness became the foundation of power. A low-valued yuan fueled factories, built cities, and trained generations of workers. It bought time. Time to rise, time to learn, time to prepare. And now, the world faces a new paradox. The West still values strength in appearance. China values control beneath the surface. One shouts about freedom, the other masters patience. In the end, history may not remember who shouted louder, but who built more. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Let us know your suggestions and requests in the comments below.